I stood in the kitchen, scraping the ladle against the pot's bottom, the screech slicing through the haze in my head. 4 hours for endless hours to make chicken noodle soup, and it was still a disaster. Broth sloshed over the edge, splattering the counter. Carrots sat in uneven chunks, noodles clumped like wet cement. Steam clouded the window above the sink, smudging the glow of streetlights into a dull blur. I didn't care. My hands moved, chop, stir, spill, while her words ricocheted inside me. The third kid isn't yours. Marli's voice cut through my skull, cold and unapologetic. I clenched the ladle, knuckles whitening. How could she? Jacob, Ethan, this house, we built it all together. I flicked my eyes to the staircase. Part of me wanted her to stomp down, retract it, call it a twisted prank, but the upstairs stayed dead quiet, swallowing every clang and curse from below. I grabbed celery, tossed it toward the pot. Half hit the stove, sizzling on the burner. Damn it, I muttered, wiping sweat off my brow with a shaky hand. Focus, Chris. Hold it together. But how? My wife, my Marli, had calculated this betrayal, like I was some broken tool she traded out. A psychiatrist should see through lies, right? Should have seen her. The knife slipped mid-chop, nicking my finger. Blood beaded, then dropped into the super red stains swirling in the mess. I sucked the cut, tasting iron, grounding myself for a split second. Was she lying, testing me? My mind spun, grasping for logic. She wouldn't. Not after everything. Jacob and Ethan slept upstairs, their small snores a faint tether to sanity. They needed us. I couldn't let this shatter them, but the doubt chewed at me, relentless. Could I even look at her again? The soup boiled over, hissing as it hit the flame. I snatched a towel, swiping at the spill, hands trembling like a junkie's. I had to confront her, demand answers. But my throat locked up, strangling the words with rage and dread. Instead, I kept stirring, the ladle scraping louder, faster. I scooped the soup into bowl slumpy, uneven, a mockery of effort. The spoons clinked against ceramic as I set the table, the sound sharp in the silence. Maybe if I acted normal, it'd stick. Maybe I could glue this back together. I glanced at the knife on the counter, its edge glinting under the light. My fingers twitched. No, not yet. I forced my voice steady, calling up the stairs, dinner's ready. The words hung there, hollow, a lifeline to a life already slipping away. The dining table stretched before me, a fragile illusion of normalcy I clung to desperately. I ladled chicken noodle soup into Jacob and Ethan's bowls, the steam curling upward, mocking the warmth we'd lost. Marli's chair sat empty, her untouched bowl a silent scream in the room's dim light. Outside, the suburban streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. "Boys, dinner's ready," I called, my voice tight, a poor imitation of cheer. Their footsteps pounded down the stairs, a burst of life against the suffocating quiet. Ethan slid into a seat, grabbing his spoon, while Jacob glanced at the vacant chair. "Where's Mom?" Ethan asked, his tone light, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "She's resting," I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. My hand trembled as I passed him the pepper, the shaker slipping slightly, clattering against the table. "Not feeling well." Jacob's brow furrowed Marli's brow, I realized with a jolt. "Is it serious?" "Just a rough day," I muttered, avoiding his eyes. I sat across from them, my own soup untouched. The broth's golden surface shimmered, but it turned my stomach. How could I eat when my world was crumbling? They dug in, spoons clinking, their chatter filling the silence. I watched them, searching their faces, Jacob's green eyes, Ethan's crooked smile hers again. Were they mine? The doubt clawed at me, sharp and relentless. Marli's confession echoed. "The third kid isn't yours." Did that mean these two were safe? Or was everything a lie? "Dad, the soup's kinda weird," Ethan said, wrinkling his nose at a lump of carrot. I forced a smile, my face stiff. Sorry, sport. I'm not your mom in the kitchen. It's fine, Jacob said, loyal as ever. She'll fix it next time. Next time. The words hit like a punch. Would there be a next time? I nodded, throat tight. Yeah, she will. They finished quickly, their energy unshaken. Can we have ice cream? Jacob asked, eyes bright. Mint chips in the freezer, I said, my voice hollow. They bolted to the living room, laughter trailing behind them, a sound that both soothed and stabbed. I stayed at the table, staring at Marli's chair. The cushion held her shape, a ghost of her presence. Anger surged at how could she do this? But beneath it, a raw ache pulsed. I'd loved her. Hadn't I? A soft creak from upstairs snapped me out of it. My heart raced. Was she coming down? I strained to hear, but the house fell silent again. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe she was leaving, packing her bags while I played father down here. The thought sent panic spiking through me. I stood, gathering the dishes with robotic precision. In the kitchen, the clatter of plates echoed as I rinsed them under the faucet. Warm water ran over my hands, but my mind spun. What if she took the boys? What if they weren't mine? DNA tests, lawyers, their confused faces as I tore our family apart. I couldn't let it come to that. They were my sons, mine. My reflection in the window stared back haggard, eyes sunken. A stranger. The boys' laughter drifted in, grounding me. I dried my hands, resolve hardening. I needed answers, but not tonight. Tonight, I'd keep it together for them. Tomorrow, I'd face her. I flicked off the kitchen light, darkness swallowing the room. A plan flickered to life. If Marli thought she could break me, she was wrong. I'd turn this pain into something sharp, something I could wield. For now, I'd hold on to the shreds of our family, but soon I'd fight back. I climbed the stairs, each step a slow, deliberate press against the hardwood. The faint creak under my boots dissolved into the house's thick silence. The hallway light buzzed and flickered, throwing jagged shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Marli's bedroom door stood ajar, a thin stripe of yellow light leaking out. My pulse thudded in my ears, a cold dread pulling in my stomach. I shouldn't be here, shouldn't need to snoop, but something dragged me forward, an itch I couldn't scratch. I edged closer, breath held tight, and pressed my shoulder against the wall. Her voice slipped through the gap, soft and fractured. I lost it, Michael, the Babbier baby. A sob broke her sentence in half. I can't do this by myself. You have to come see me, please. My blood froze. Michael. The name burned into my skull, sharp and permanent. My fingers clamped around the door frame, knuckles bleaching white, as she kept talking. He doesn't know. I can't tell him yet, but I need you. I'm falling apart here. The world tilted. I mashed my forehead against the plaster, its coolness grounding me as I forced air into my lungs. It was real. Every word nailed it, shudder betrayal, her secrets, her decision to toss me aside. My brain clicked into overdrive, a detached calm sliding over me like armor. She's mourning, I thought, but not for what we had. She lost his kid, not mine. Relief spiked through me, bitter and twisted, then melted into a slow-boiling rage. I nudged the door wider, just enough to peek inside. Marli sat on the edge of the bed, foam pressed to her ear, her back to me. Her shoulders trembled, black streaks of mascara trailing down her face. I know you said it was a mistake, but I can't. She stopped, listening, then her voice dropped to a whisper. I love you. It hit me like a freight train. I stumbled back, the hallway lurching under my feet. Love? She loved him? My chest squeezed tight, breaths coming in short, jagged bursts. I'd figured it was just sexo reckless fling to get the third kid she nagged me about, but this was a gut punch. She'd handed him her soul, too. I staggered to the stairs and sank onto the top step, hands shaking as I gripped the banister. I stared into the dark below, the house's silence pressing in, mocking me. Every shadow seemed to leer, a witness to my shame. Downstairs, the boys' laughter floated up from the living room bright, oblivious, a knife twisting deeper. They were my anchor, my reason. I wouldn't let her rip them away. She'd made her move. Now I'd make mine. A plan sparked, icy and sharp-edged. If she wanted to torch our life, I'd burn hers down first. Not with fists or yelling that was too crude, too easy to trace. No, I weaponized what I knew best, the mind. I'd dismantle her, slow and surgical, until she was a wreck begging for mercy I wouldn't give. And Michael? I'd track him down, bury him somewhere no one ever dig. The idea sent a dark thrill racing through me. I glanced back at her door, the light still bleeding out. Part of me ached to barge in, scream her lies back in her face until my voice gave out. But that was the old Chris weak, impulsive. This Chris played smarter. I'd be the doting husband she thought she could fool, biding my time until the perfect moment to strike. I stood, my legs steadier now, resolve locking into place like a steel trap. I started down the stairs, each step firm, the boys' laughter pulling me back to earth. They were mine to protect, no matter what it took. Marli had lit the fuse on this war, but I'd be the one to end it. And when I did, she'd regret ever breathing his name. I stood over the stove, the soft hiss of the gas flame cutting through the silence of the kitchen. A pot simmered before me, steam rising in faint curls, carrying the earthy aroma of chicken broth mingled with thyme and rosemary. My hands moved with a surgeon's precision, stirring the soup in slow, deliberate circles. But my focus wasn't on the cooking. It was on the small amber bottle nestled in my pocket, its peeling label a quiet testament to my intent, the pills inside a key to reclaiming power. Marli was upstairs, barricaded in her room. Her sobs had softened, now a distant murmur, like thunder fading over the horizon. Earlier, I'd heard her pacing, her voice low and frantic as she clutched her phonia lifeline to a world I no longer belonged to. She hadn't eaten last night, hadn't even touched the bowl I left outside her door. But tonight would be different. Tonight, she'd eat. I'd see to it. I slipped the bottle from my pocket, its plastic cool against my skin. The label read fluoxetine, but that was only part of the arsenal. I'd pilfered more from the hospital sertraline, amitriptylinia cocktail to cloud her mind, to trap her in a labyrinth of her own thoughts. Nothing fatal, just enough to unravel her, thread by thread. I twisted the cap, the faint click sharp in the stillness. 2 pills tumbled into my palm, white and unassuming. I crushed them between my fingers, the powder fine as dust. With a quick glance toward the stairs, I tipped my hand over the pot, letting the grains dissolve into the broth. I stirred, watching them vanish, a dark thrill coiling in my chest. This was my territory, know her mind, her will, her future. The soup bubbled gently, its surface trembling with each pass of the spoon. I tossed in a pinch of salt, a dash of pepper, tasting it with a clinical detachment. It was bland, unremarkable, but that was irrelevant. This wasn't about flavor. It was about dominion. I'm still here, Marli. You don't get to forget me. I ladled the soup into a bowl, steam drifting upward in lazy tendrils. The kitchen's fluorescent light hummed overhead, bathing the counter in a cold, sterile glow. I arranged the bowl on a tray, adding a spoon and a glass of water. My hands didn't tremble. My breathing stayed steady. The fury that had consumed me days ago had hardened into something colder, more precise. I wasn't flailing anymore. I was orchestrating. Tray in hand, I ascended the stairs. The house lay quiet, the boys at school, afternoon sunlight spilling through the windows in muted streaks. At her door, I knocked softly. Marli, I brought you something to eat. A pause, then a faint, I'm not hungry. My jaw clenched. You need to eat. It's been days. Another silence stretched, taut as a wire. The door eased open, just enough for her face to emerge pale, hollowed out, eyes rimmed with red. She glanced at the tray, then at me, a shadow of mistrust flickering in her gaze. Why are you doing this? I summoned a smile, though it felt like a mask. Because I care about you. We're still a family, Marli. She wavered, then stepped aside, the door creaking wider. I entered, placing the tray on her bedside table. The room reeked of neglect-stale air, crumpled sheets. She sank onto the bed's edge, shoulders slumped, hands knotted in her lap. Eat, I said, my tone soft but unyielding. Her fingers closed around the spoon, her movements sluggish, robotic. She dipped it into the soup, lifting it to her mouth. I watched, breath held as she swallowed, then again and again. A surge of victory pulsed through me. It was happening. She was consuming her own undoing, bite by bite. I turned to go, but her voice halted me. Chris? I paused, hand on the doorknob, and glanced back. Yeah? Her eyes met mine, probing, uncertain. Why are you being so nice? The question lingered, thick with unspoken weight. Doubt clouded her face, a crack in her defenses. For a fleeting second, pity stirred in me, but it passed. I shrugged, keeping my voice light. Because I'm your husband. It's what I do. She nodded, but the uncertainty lingered in her stare. I stepped out, shutting the door behind me. As I descended the stairs, a faint smile curved my lips. The game was on, and I held the winning hand. The car's engine hummed beneath my hands, a steady, thrumming pulse that vibrated through my grip on the steering wheel. I guided the vehicle down the narrow dirt road, its tires crunching over loose gravel and fallen twigs, the headlights carving twin beams through the deepening twilight of the forest preserve. On either side, ancient trees loomed, their gnarled branches stretching upward like skeletal fingers clawing at the bruised sky. The air filtering through the cracked window carried the scent of pine and damp earth, sharp and cool against my skin. Beside me, Marli sat motionless, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze locked on the dashboard as if it held some secret she couldn't unravel. She hadn't spoken a word since we left the hospital, her silence a thick, oppressive weight that pressed against my chest. I told her this was a treatment outing, a chance to breathe fresh air, to escape the sterile antiseptic walls of her ward. She nodded, listless, her trust in me fragile, a threadbare thing stretched to its breaking point. The road widened into a small clearing, and I eased the car to a stop, the engine's growl softening to a low purr before I twisted the key and silenced it entirely. The forest swallowed us in an instant, its stillness profound, broken only by the distant, mournful hoot of an owl echoing through the canopy. I glanced at Marli. Her face was pale, almost luminescent in the fading light, her eyes darting nervously to the shadows beyond the windshield. Where are we? She whispered, her voice so faint it barely reached me. Somewhere quiet. I replied, keeping my tone light, casual, though my pulse thudded hard in my throat, a relentless drumbeat of anticipation. Thought it might help you relax. She nodded again, a mechanical motion, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her seatbelt, knuckles whitening. I stepped out of the car, the evening air biting at my exposed skin, and circled to her side. Opening the door, I offered my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, her touch, feather-light, tentative. I led her across the clearing to a fallen log at its edge, its bark slick with damp moss, the wood softened by years of decay. She sat, pulling her sweater tighter around her thin shoulders, her breath visible in faint puffs against the chill. I slipped my phone from my pocket, the screen's sudden glow harsh and jarring in the dimness. My thumb hovered over the video file, the one I labeled simply M. Michael's last moments, his confession, his burial. I'd watched it countless times, alone in the dark, memorizing every frame, every shudder of his voice, every twitch of his lips as he spat his final, venomous words. Marli was just a fling. I hate you. The memory sent a shiver of dark satisfaction rippling through me, warming my blood despite the cold. Chris? Marli's voice trembled, pulling me back to the present. What are we doing here? I met her gaze, schooling my expression into something neutral, unreadable. I have something to show you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Something important. Her brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her features, tinged with the first faint stirrings of fear. I tapped the screen, and the video sprang to life. The phone's light washed over her face, casting it in a ghostly pallor as Michael's image filled the frame. His voice crackled through the tiny speaker, slurred and thick from the drugs I'd slipped him. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Burying me out here like some dog." Marli's eyes widened, her breath hitching audibly in her throat. "What is this?" she asked, her voice breaking on the last word. "Keep watching," I said, low and firm, my eyes never leaving her face. On the screen, Michael's face contorted in pain, his words spilling out in a desperate, ragged rasp. "She never loved you. It was always me. Always." Then the shadow of the shovel fell across his chest and the screen cut to black, the silence that followed heavy and absolute. Marli's hands flew to her mouth, a choked sob bursting from her lips. No, that's not real. It can't be." I stepped closer, my shadow falling over her like a shroud. "It's real, Marli," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "He's gone, and he never loved you. He said it himself." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks, catching the faint light. "You're lying," she cried, her voice rising, shrill and panicked. "You made this up." I seized her wrist, my fingers closing around it with bruising force, forcing her to meet my gaze. "I didn't make it up," I said, each word sharp and cold. "I buried him, right here, in this forest, and now you know what he really thought of you." Her sobs turned to wails, raw and guttural, her body convulsing with the weight of her grief and terror. She tried to wrench her arm free, but I held fast, my grip unyielding, an anchor in her storm. "You did this to us, Marli," I said, my voice cutting through her cries. "You and your lies. Now you get to live with it." Her strength gave out, and she collapsed against the log, her wails echoing through the trees, a haunting sound that mingled with the rustle of leaves overhead. I released her, stepping back, my chest heaving as I sucked in the cold, earthy air. The forest seemed to tighten around us, its shadows deepening, the air thick with the scent of decay and wet soil. I dreamed of this moment for months, years, maybe of watching her break beneath the truth, of stripping away every illusion she'd clung to. But now that it was here, a hollow ache gnawed at my core, sharp and unexpected. Was this victory, or just another wound I'd carved into myself? Marli's cries softened to whimpers, her body curling in on itself, knees drawn up to her chest. I knelt beside her, my voice dropping to something softer, almost gentle. "It's over now," I said. "You can let it go." She lifted her head, her eyes glassy, unfocused, tears streaking through the dirt smudged on her face. "Why, Chris?" she whispered, her voice raw. "Why did you do this?" I swallowed hard, the weight of her question sinking into me like a stone. "Because you took everything from me," I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "My trust, my family, my sanity. I had to take something back." She stared at me, her expression vacant, uncomprehending. Then her gaze drifted to the phone still clutched in my hand. "He's really gone?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. I nodded, the finality of it settling deep in my gut, heavy and cold. "Yes." Marli's shoulders slumped, the last of her resistance draining away. She looked small, fragile, a broken shell of the woman I'd once married, the woman I'd loved until the betrayal had twisted that love into something dark and unrecognizable. I stood, sliding the phone back into my pocket, and extended my hand. "Let's go back," I said. She took it, her fingers limp and cold in mine, and I pulled her to her feet. She stumbled slightly, and I steadied her, guiding her back to the car. The drive back to the city was silent, the forest's impenetrable darkness gradually giving way to the harsh neon glow of streetlights and billboards. Marli stared out the window, her face blank, her mind lost somewhere I couldn't follow. I'd one delivered my retribution with surgical precision, but the victory tasted like ash in my mouth, dry and bitter. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty, and I wondered, not for the first time, what I'd truly gained. I sat in my office, the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights overhead blending into a low, constant drone that matched the steady rhythm of my thoughts. Beyond my door, the hospital's psychiatric ward sprawled a labyrinth of locked rooms and hushed murmurs, but here, behind my desk, I reigned supreme. Marli's file lay open in front of me, her name stark in black ink at the top, Marli Thompson. My wife, my patient, my captive. I traced the letters with my fingertip, the paper cool and smooth beneath my touch. I flipped to my latest entry, my handwriting crisp and deliberate. Patient shows signs of early onset dementia, memory loss, confusion, and disorientation progressing. Recommend ongoing observation and medication adjustments. A faint smile flickered across my lips. Dementia tidy catch-all diagnosis for the ruin I'd sculpted in her mind. The mix of antipsychotics and sedatives I'd prescribed had worked flawlessly, unraveling her reality until she was a mere specter, her once keen intellect blunted into something soft and harmless. Leaning back, the leather chair creaked under me as I glanced at the wall clock. Almost time for rounds. I'd see her soon, as always, slipping into the role of devoted husband and tireless doctor. The staff murmured about me sometimes, their tones laced with pity. Poor Dr. Thompson, so dedicated, so hopeful. They didn't suspect a thing. They saw only what I let them see: a man holding on to a crumbling marriage, chasing a miracle that wouldn't come. It was a performance I'd honed to perfection. The phone buzzed, jolting me from my thoughts. I picked it up, my voice warm and practiced. Dr. Thompson speaking. Hey, Dad, Jacob's voice came through, light and unburdened. Just checking in. How's Mom? I swallowed the lie smooth and automatic. She's stable, buddy. No changes today. He sighed, a hint of teenage frustration in the sound. I miss her. When can we see her again? My grip tightened on the receiver, knuckles whitening. Soon, I said, the word bitter on my tongue. When she's a bit stronger. We traded a few more line of school updates. His brother's soccer game then hung up. The silence flooded back, thick and heavy. The boys were my anchor, the reason I kept this charade alive. They deserved a mother, even if she was just a faint echo of who she'd been. And me? I deserved this triumph, this silent, enduring payback. I rose, adjusted my tie, and smoothed my white coat. The hallway outside was still, smelling faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. My footsteps echoed on the linoleum as I headed to Marli's room. At her door, I paused, peering through the small window. She sat by the glass, staring at the gray sky, hands limp in her lap. She didn't stir as I entered. I pulled a chair close. How are you feeling today, Marli? I asked, my tone soft and coaxing. Her eyes drifted to mine, dull and unfocused. Tired, she mumbled, the words slurring. Always tired. I nodded, taking her cool, limp hand. That's normal, I said soothingly. You're healing. She blinked slowly, then looked back to the window. Healing, she repeated, the word empty. We sat in silence, the quiet stretching between us. No words were needed. Her mind bore the scars of my victory. I'd won, completely. Yet, watching her vacant stare, a faint unease gnawed at me too. Perfect. Too easy. I shoved it down, stood, and pressed a cold kiss to her forehead. I'll see you tomorrow, I said, leaving. In the hallway, the door clicked shut, and I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The game was done. Marli was mind broken, subdued, and I was free. My retribution absolute.